Hey, welcome back to Revenue Optimization Radio. It's the one show that takes a look at, well, how to optimize your revenue. Hosted by Patrick Morrissey, CMO of Altify. Revenue Optimization Radio is brought to you by those good folks. So why hold back? Let's have them tell you more right now. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
Welcome back, friends, to another edition of Revenue Optimization Radio. I am beyond thrilled for this episode because I have somebody who has multiple superpowers, has a wealth of insight, and maybe as importantly, comes from a place of just trying to help. And when I talk about help, in this case, we're talking about communication. And in part one of this episode, we're going to talk about how do you build a great presentation? Because what I find in talking to senior sales leaders, revenue leaders, sales marketing, etc., is there is a big premium put on being able to stand your ground and present in front of the room. And we have someone here today, Bronwyn Saglimbeni, who is a coach and is an international superstar of communication, from having been in this field for a long time, working with public companies and startups, and from doing everything from just basics of communication skills to, I think, midwifing more than 150 TED Talks. So you work with the best of the best, getting ready for them to present and for them to show well, also on the big public stage, like American Idol or people going on the Oprah show. You know what's going on. Bronwyn, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Pat, for having me.
So I've had the good fortune to follow you in your career for a long time, which evolved
since the very beginning.
Way back.
Since the very beginning.
And you have become progressively more powerful and more exciting to watch because your career evolved from doing technology marketing to PR to then media training to communication training to now communication really coaching and strategy. Give us a little context about Bronwyn Communications, what you do and who you do it with.
Sure. My whole professional life is organized around one principle, and that is I am here to help people shine. It's what I'm obsessed with. It's what I think about every day. It's how do I get the best performance out of every person I come into contact with as a client. And it's something that brings me a tremendous amount of joy because I've never once ever met a human being that was boring, or that was lackluster, or that wasn't at the very core of them interesting and compelling. But I've met a lot of people with a lot of bad habits, or a lot of limiting beliefs, or a lot of bad processes. And that is where I come in. So I come in to help people do their best, become their best selves, regardless of the audience, especially when the audience is a tough one, or when the stakes are really high. That's my sweet spot.
I love that. And I want to come back to a couple of things you hit on in terms of bad process, limiting beliefs, but maybe more importantly, everybody's interesting and everybody has a story to tell.
Yeah.
So let's think about this writ large for a second. There's a lot of people who think about having to give a presentation as one of the most terrifying things in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that is in just the local school or community environment, much less you're an executive at a publicly traded company and your day job includes for internal and external audiences giving a presentation, it can be tremendously stressful, scary, or worse. Why is that?
I mean, we could be here all day discussing that. I think any time that all eyes are on you is terrifying. I mean, we're just humans and we're all secretly worried that we're not enough. Every single person, except for maybe the sociopath narcissist, we're all just a little bit freaked out that we're not enough. And it's as true for the president of a publicly traded company as it is for my 8th grader, I still can't believe I have an 8th grader, who gets up in front of the room to do a book report. We're all just a little worried about that. And what I try and remind people of is that if you make it about you, it is terrifying. And of course it's terrifying because everybody is looking at you, but you have a choice. We can look at it either as, oh my God, my ego is on the line. My worth as a human person is on the line right now. Or we can make it about service. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about this audience. And I'm here to do something, to lift them up, to teach them, to make them stronger, to make them smarter. And if I can get out of my head and into a place of devotion to them or to whatever my goal is, then I can put some muscle into it and deliver. And so that's part of the shift that we have to make is I think a lot of times people bring me in and when I give talks and things like that, and they think I'm here to like show them how to hold their hand when they talk or move their body a certain way. Who cares? I'm there to help them focus on the audience first. What do they need and how do we surprise them and dazzle them? And then once that's handled, then we can talk about what you do with your body or techniques for making your voice sound a little more resonant or whatever the thing is. But we've got it flipped. A lot of times we think good communicating means right posture or pacing versus standing still in front of the room. None of that shit matters. It's how do you delight, inspire, surprise, and engage a group of people. That's where the real work is done.
So I want to come back to several things you hit on there, but give us a little bit of perspective because you have a fantastic podcast, 20 Minutes with Bronwyn, which I highly recommend. And you've talked to a couple of people who have been people you've worked with and coached in terms of giving a TED Talk. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about presentation broadly, take us behind the curtain because everyone visualizes, or a lot of people visualize, what great looks like in public speaking is what you can find in TED. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those people weren't great public speakers before they found themselves on the TED stage. Yeah. Give us the insider perspective on if you're going to give a great presentation and if you're going to do something like TED that may be seen hundreds or millions of times the world over, what are the critical components to get to a compelling presentation?
Well, it's funny, whenever I was giving instruction or support to somebody giving a TED or TEDx or TEDglobal talk, I would always say the worst thing you can do is give a TED talk. It's the worst thing you can do because they're a cliche. If they're not handled properly, you can just become a cliche. Like, here's my world-changing idea. I mean, there's spoofs online making fun of TED Talks for that reason. But what makes the platform so good and what makes a good TED Talk good is not a formula. And it's not the sort of self-congratulatory, look what I've been working on. It is creating a moment of intimacy with an audience where you're with great humility and great enthusiasm, telling them what you know to be true, right? Telling them what you've been working on that's an idea worth spreading and doing it with authenticity and humor or whatever it is that you bring to the table. That's what makes a good TED Talk. And I think one of the things that I do, and I don't know that other coaches do this is my process, especially for a TED Talk, is you have to be willing to take an audience on an emotional journey. So I always have people map out their talks based on part 1, part 2, part 3, act 1, act 2, act 3. How do we want the audience to feel in the first 30 seconds of this talk? How do we want them to feel in the middle and how do we want them to feel at the end? Because what we know from neuroscience, it's not just my opinion, that we remember the emotional dimensions of an experience better than anything else. So if we're just standing there throwing facts in an audience or giving a case study that's ho-hum or saying something we think might be interesting but nobody else does, it's never going to stick in somebody's brain. Not even for 5 minutes. So the way we do that is we play with emotions like fear or surprise. Or I remember I was working with somebody, and I can't specify what field it's in, but let's just say it touched upon climate change.
Okay, we'll go with that.
And he was joking because he said, we've been trying this, make the audience feel afraid as a way to motivate them to change, to affect policy change, to do something about climate change. But he's like, that's not working. So I think what we should just have them feel is worried about how much it's going to cost to pay for all the damages done by climate change. So let's move out of making them worried that the world is going to end because it turns out they don't care. Let's make them worried about how much it's going to cost to take care of these massive, large-scale floodings and things like that, which I thought was kind of interesting because these poor climate scientists have been shilling fear for so long. It hasn't worked. But anyway, my point is, Pat, that big emotions at the beginning, the middle, and end are the way you drive a point home.
So let me challenge you on that for a second, because you said a number of things that might sound like it's a little bit scary, and at worst, you're speaking a foreign language, you're completely off topic, because you mentioned things like creating a moment, intimacy, personal connection, as well as emotion, which are not the types of things that you would expect to see on an earnings call, or when you're briefing an analyst, or when you're giving the quarterly all-company update to the global troops around the world, much less, you're out on stage at a conference forum, or any variety of those things that are broadly in the realm of business, right? How does that come to life? Because there are a lot of people that I think would automatically turn off by this notion of intimacy, much less emotion in telling a story. It's like, we got to deliver the facts. They got to know what they're supposed to be doing, and we got to deliver the number. And this is a Patton-esque get after it moment.
Yeah, it's so funny. I literally had someone ask me this when I was giving a talk recently. And while I know it seems strange to use words like intimacy and emotion when you're in a business setting, but it's not even just what I make as a strong recommendation. It's necessary. necessary to cut through the bullshit that's in the mind of the audience, right? They just want to check their phones most of the time while we're talking. So how do you get them to not do that? You create tension, right? It's like any good experience, any good entertainment moment. There is tension, there is conflict, there is intrigue. So let's say you're in front of a conference trying to sell your particular take on how an industry should play out and why people should buy your stuff. Getting up and explaining the industry dynamics or what's at stake for companies if they get this wrong. What could go wrong if they don't play this right? That is a moment of creating the audience wants to lean in. Oh God, what does happen if I get this wrong? What does happen if status quo just plays out and we don't do something different with our business, right? We have to embrace creating tension and embrace highlighting where the interest and intrigue is. If not, it's no problem. You don't get fired for not using intrigue and tension and emotion. It's fine. But nobody pays attention. Nobody remembers. It's like immediately, in fact, I always encourage people to watch when you're at a conference, you're in a meeting, watch when people tend to check their phones. It's like you can tell the minute the brain is like, I already know what's happening. I've already seen this pitch. And this is the mistake I see salespeople make all the time. They go in with the same pitch that they think is so unique and so differentiated. And it literally is the same sales deck that has been trotted out since you and I were puppies and freaking Y2K. Right? With the exception of a few tweaks. So I think while it does sound theatrical, while it does sound a little extra to be talking about emotion and tension and intrigue and conflict, it's table stakes now because I think attention spans have never been shorter. And we have to do what I think Hollywood, what Madison Avenue, what anybody who's in charge of attention span knows to be true, which is if you're not playing some level of emotion into the playbook, you're missing out.
Well, and what's implicit in that is the need to tell a story.
Yeah.
I had Doug Landis, who's a partner at Emergence Capital and has been in sales productivity and a former salesperson, and he coaches companies big and small about this. And he talked about the difference between good and great being the ability to tell a story and how we all tell stories in our personal life, but we sometimes miss a trick there, or we don't think about, we talk in bullet points at work.
That's right.
How do you get around that?
It's such a great question. And the absolute best piece of advice I can give is to become a good story collector. And Pat, that's something you've always done a great job with. You've always been watching and listening for that amazing nugget that comes out in a customer call. Or I remember working with you and seeing what a story collector you are. But I have clients that have like just a Google spreadsheet where they plug in little nuggets that they hear. And stories don't mean, when I say stories, I don't mean like, gee, so-and-so just bought a bunch of our product. Isn't that great? I mean, so-and-so was facing insurmountable obstacle X, didn't think there was going to be any way to get through it, and they did Y differently, and it changed, and here's what the outcomes were. In the context of work, I think every team should have like a shared document somewhere where they can just plug in notes like, this is what I heard today. I thought it was amazing. Let's get approval, da-da-da. But in your personal life, I think this is where you can practice story collection and storytelling skills even more actively.
Yeah, and you had a guest on your podcast recently who talked about
Corey
that.
Rosen.
Talking about collecting stories.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about that. About how do you get those building blocks that help you when you're going to need it down the road to deliver the giant presentation. You need a collection of stories.
You absolutely do. And I think what happens is people, okay, I have to give a presentation. Oh God, I need stories. And then you sit there with your pencil and none are available. So he recommended, which since that podcast interview, I've been doing this diligently. I've got a spreadsheet going with it's called Homework for Life. This is actually based on another, the book is called Storyworthy, and I can't think of the writer's name. But anyway, he recommended at the end of every day, you have a spreadsheet and you write in, what are the stories that I heard today or that I experienced that I could see myself telling at a dinner party, or that I could see myself telling my spouse tomorrow of what went down. And what it does is it trains your mind to perceive when something has become story-worthy, which is a skill. It really is a skill. And one of the telltale signs, some of the best stories of all time, and The Moth, which is Corey's a big part of the moth. What they're very big on is stories that show moments of change. You go into a situation believing one thing, you leave knowing something else to be true, right? And while this sounds lofty and like you can see it applied in a personal life or whatever, it's just as appropriate in a business context too, right? You have a situation where you're trying to get to the bottom of a customer problem and you finally get to the heart of it and you realize it's actually 3 problems wrapped in one, and now you've got a new way to look at it, a new lens for it. But this skill of story collection and being in the mindset of being on the lookout for them, it literally changes the way you experience your day. Like inconveniences suddenly are like, wait a minute, this might end up on my spreadsheet later.
That's a good story.
I'm going to watch this. I'm going to see what happens. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And then when it comes time to build a presentation, which we'll talk about in a second, you've got this battery of story. And by collecting them in one place, you start to see trends, especially in a business context. If you've got people plugging in stories that they're hearing,
right,
you're going to see trends surface.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, pattern matching
is key.
And that's how we all get through the world. We're able to pick up the patterns and decide what we're supposed to do based on the information available.
Thank you. And some of the best speakers out there get up and point us to a pattern that we may have suspected was the case, but we never put it together. And we walk out going, God, right on. That helps me. I get that now, right? But it's interesting. What we do is we just muscle through the day. We go one meeting to the next. And if we take a break, we go on our phones. That is not story collecting. That is not getting into a headspace of becoming a better communicator. That is just numbing out.
Right.
That is looking for a steady drip of stimulation like lab rats. Great communicators know how to take a breath, pause, reflect on what just happened, and write it down,
Perfect. So let's take a pause right now, pay a few bills, and then we'll come back and get your tips and tricks about how to put together a world-class presentation.
We live in a subscription economy. You're only as successful as your customers, and that requires a mindset shift from what's our strategy for the customer to what's our customer's strategy and how can we help. Focusing on your customers' needs and providing value in every interaction is critical to building long-term relationships and sustained sales success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams is their sales process doesn't match how customers buy in today's digital world. Sustained growth and sales execution are impossible because the revenue team isn't aligned with consistent process and methodology to understand their customers' people and their problems. Altify's customer revenue optimization solutions activates the entire revenue team with a combination of strategy, methodology, and applications to help companies deliver more value to their customers. The result is increased sales velocity, improved win rates, and increased customer satisfaction. With a CRO strategy, now you can effectively collaborate across the entire revenue team to win new business and unlock more cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps revenue leaders and their teams achieve sustained revenue growth and sales success. Visit Altify.com today to see how they help accelerate sales performance for some of the world's best sales teams, including Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Health Group.
And with that, we hand it back to Patrick and his discussion.
And welcome back, everybody. We are talking today with communications coach Bronwyn Saglimbeni, who's also the host of 20 Minutes with Bronwyn, a fantastic podcast on helping people become better communicators. And when we left off a second ago and you were starting to talk about keeping people off their phones, that's probably, I know from having listened to you and talked to you, that that's enemy number one when you think about executing on a great presentation. So give me a framework for how to think about and then construct a great presentation.
Mm-hmm. The first thing I have people do is just ask the right questions. The worst thing we can do when we're about to build a presentation is go to an existing presentation and save as. I'm not saying you can't eventually save as, but step one is, number one, close your computer. 2, shut off the freaking phone. and ask the right questions, right? There's logistical questions like, how much time do I have? Really? I cannot tell you, Pat, how many times I have worked with people that bring me in kind of last minute and they've got a 45-minute deck. And I ask them, but how much time do you have? And they're like, well, I'm assuming it's 45 minutes. That's what I usually have, only to find out they have 17 minutes, right?
Yes.
So how much time do you literally have? And what is the expectation around a lot of meetings look and sound and smell and feel like they're supposed to be you in front of the room beating up an audience with a PowerPoint. But really what the audience wants is a conversation, right?
Yes.
Understanding like what culture are you walking into? Like there's certain people who I won't name them in the Valley where if you walk with a slide deck into their office, they're going to make you shut it down immediately and go to the whiteboard because they want to, number one, they want to get you off your footing a little bit. And number two, they want to see how your mind works.
Right.
They don't want to see the pitch. So anyway, so knowing that, like,
does anyone want to see the pitch?
Does anyone
Can I just ask that question? Does anyone want to see the pitch?
It depends. Depends on how good the pitch is. It really does. Most of the time, no, they don't want to see the pitch. They want to talk about their own business problem. Right? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Number one, logistics. How much time do I have? What time of day is it? Are people hungry? Is it the 3 o'clock? I need coffee. Like, what are you dealing with in a human context?
Yes.
Right? Who's talking before you? Who else are they speaking to? All of these things that we sometimes forget to ask, right? But then we need to get into questions like, what role are you here to play? Like if you're going in and it's quote unquote a sales pitch,
right.
That's not a very interesting role to consider. Now, alternatives to what's my motivation? I'm a sales guy. That's not that interesting.
Right.
What's your motivation? You know what I am? I'm somebody here I'm a shit disturber. I'm here to stir the pot. I'm here to get them thinking. I'm here to get them questioning whether the status quo is the right call for them. I'm here as an evangelist. I'm here as a prophet. Like, what am I here for, metaphorically speaking? And the reason that is such a fun question to ask is that establishes your tone. Right? So when I go into a room and my role is to be a teacher, an evangelist, somebody who gets people excited to do something differently, that is one very specific tone that I use. But sometimes I go in and I'm helping somebody come up with a message around something really uncomfortable. They've got to give bad news to a board of directors.
Right.
That tone, very different, right? But I find that sometimes salespeople have one tone. Salesperson. And that's just not that interesting. And people are more interesting than that. So one of the things is getting clear, what role am I here to play figuratively, right? The next question I have people ask is who is in the room? Because yes, there are times when you're talking to a room of 1,500 people or 40 people or 20 people, but by and large, Pat, we're talking to 5 or 6 or 2 or 3. And we should be able to say, this person is predisposed probably in this direction for this topic I'm talking about. This person cares a lot about whatever, ROI or whatever it is.
Right.
Getting into the head of each person at the table. What are they going to be skeptical about? What are they going to be excited about? And how do I meet their needs? And only when that has been completely fleshed out do I let anybody think about building a presentation, right? Because what I find is that when you go through that exercise, I like to do it on a whiteboard so I can stand back and look at it. Then you go, oh, I see a pattern here. This need cuts across all 5 of these people. This level of skepticism cuts across 3 out of the 5. So I better start somewhere in the nexus point of these overlapping pieces, right?
Yes.
So one of the questions I love to ask is like, what is the thing that they're thinking that they're too polite to say out loud? What if you started there? Right? Or what is the prevailing sort of safe, sacred cow wisdom about this topic that I'd like to put on the frying pan, right? How do I show within the first 30 seconds of this pitch that it is not business as usual?
Right.
Time well spent, right? These are the things I like to have people ask. Another question I like people to ask is, what does success look like for this meeting? And I don't want to hear a signed contract. That's not the answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for what is the highest act of service I can provide these people. Maybe they'll buy from me, maybe they won't. But how can I create a relationship where I'm their go-to person for forever? That when I leave, they're going to be like, you know what, I'm calling Pat about customer success because I'm not ready to buy now, but the guy knows a bunch of stuff and I wanted to be my friend. and I want to be able to ask him things. That to me is a successful meeting. Now, it also so happens that usually those are the meetings that become revenue generating. But if you go in with the intention of like, you know what success looks like for this meeting? Sign contract. They can feel it. It's like that freaking, did I ever tell you about that dude that took me to the Rolling Stones concert?
No.
Okay, so blind date, Rolling Stones concert tickets for a blind date. I was like, wow, this is big time. What a nice man. It became clear within about 20 minutes that there was a real endpoint in his date game that he had in his mind. And it was so clear within 15 minutes. I was like, this is the worst experience of a concert I've ever had because I know that he's trying to close something. And guess what? There's no way, right? So what I'm saying is like in the sales world, it's a metaphor,
yes.
Okay? But like an audience knows when you're manipulating them into a very specific end game and they don't like it, right? So for me, it's getting right about like, what is the highest act of service I can provide? What does success look like for this conversation? Not from a greedy standpoint, but from a relationship building standpoint. And lastly, one of the things I like to have people ask is, what skill am I going to work on in this meeting? Right? So is it going to be that I want to work on my listening? I want to get really good at decoding what's really going on in a conversation. Usually what happens is a question gets lobbed. We already think we know where they're going with it. And we basically answer a different question, not the one they asked.
Right.
We're not always great at listening. So maybe this presentation, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to wow them and surprise them and delight them. But I'm also going to use it as an opportunity to really work on my listening skills. Now, the reason why that is so important is that it takes the pressure of closing or manipulating the outcome off, and it makes you focus on what you can control, which is your own ability to listen and perceive and adapt to what's going on in a conversation. So I like to have people do that. Okay, now you get to pull out a whiteboard area and map what the conversation ought to be. So I always say Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I like that format. It's what Ira Glass does on This American Life.
Yep.
So Act 1 of the meeting might be, we're going to establish what the problem is, or we're going to establish what we think is a huge opportunity, or we're going to begin the conversation in some high stakes manner, whatever that is, right? So when I go on stage, I always start by scaring the audience a little bit. It's something I like to do. And I like to scare them by saying, I'm so glad I'm here. I'm a communication coach. I'm here to, help you shine. But there's just this one little thing that all audiences have in common. They don't want to pay attention to what you're saying ever. Right? They want to check their phones. I'm so sorry, but that's the truth. And when I say that, people are like, oh God, well, what do I do now? And then I got them. They're mine. Now they're mine. And I show them how to move through that. But that's an example of establishing a high stakes opening remark, right? Or a high stakes conversation. So that's Act 1 is whatever that is. That's Act 1. Act 2 is where we're actually solving together. We're no longer worshiping the problem or freaking anybody out. We are literally moving towards solutions.
Okay.
Here's what this could look like. This is where the audience should feel inspired, motivated, empowered. Right? And Act 3 might be the give and take of a good conversation of Q&A, or it could be, while Act 2 has been about, look at what we can do together. Act 3 could be, what's the next step for you? What does the future look like? What does audacious look like? And so you're ending on that high note, right? So whatever your presentation is, think about it in terms, it's like in music. It's never just a chorus the whole time. You need a verse, you need a chorus, you need a bridge. You got to create some sort of dynamism. Once you've mapped your thing, and these are the emotions you want to play with, and this is the general journey you want to take them, then you go in and you layer in, great, what are my facts? What is the data? What are the stories, the examples, the anecdotes? Do I have approvals? If not, how do I get them? Am I ready to answer pricing questions? You'd be shocked at how many people, when I used to do a lot of media training, I would be like, okay, great, what does it cost? And they're like, it depends on seats, it depends on licensing, and you can just see them sweat, and you're like, wait a minute. I just asked you what it costs. Why is this a thing, right? So that's when you go and you layer in all the detail. You got that, good. Still have an open PowerPoint. You notice this? We're just whiteboarding, right? Next, what I have people do is get in front of a mirror and just try it. Give it a 20 minutes, feeling like an idiot in front of a mirror. Just do the pitch. Does it feel good? Does it feel boring? Are there parts where you're like, oh, whoa, I'm not allowed to say that. I'm so glad I just said that out loud, because written down, it didn't look bad. But speaking it out loud, I would have gotten in huge trouble. When you've decided this is the right flow, this is the right outline, these are the right stories, this is the right data, then you open your deck and build. Because what people do is they spend a ton of time polishing turds. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Turd polishing is 80% of PowerPoint.
Yep.
Right? And then you get up in front of the room and you start to sweat and you think it's an attack of nerves. You know what it is? It's your brain going, dude, this is a turd. And I have 20 slides left.
And I didn't come in here with a plan to help us all be successful.
Exactly. Exactly.
And luckily, we're going to continue what does success look like in part 2 of this podcast. But as we're wrapping up here, Bronwyn, if I'm thinking about how do I become a better presentation person, and separate from the framework you just laid out, if I'm looking for some examples and some resources, what would you recommend? Where should I go?
Such a good question. I think there's a couple of books I want to recommend. First of all, consume. Watch TED Talks. Listen to the Moth. They have a podcast. They have Moth events all over the country where you can go watch people tell great stories from the stage. But also, not only that, look, when you read the newspaper, online. God, I sounded like my dad just then for a second. When you look at how journalists present really complicated issues, watch how they lay it out. Go read the latest on talks with North Korea. That's a really complicated, ancient problem. And they've got, 200 words for us to decide whether or not we're going to continue to read?
Yep.
Look how they lay it out. How does the reverse pyramid work? Like, really become a connoisseur of good communicating. And the best places to go for that are New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, The Moth, This American Life, TED, right? So that's one set of things. But then also there are, I almost think of them as like programs that you can do on your own. Like the book I'm in the middle of right now, Storyworthy. Brilliant advice on becoming a better storyteller. Brilliant. Anything by Brene Brown. Absolutely anything by Brene Brown. But her last one that was Rising Strong, I think, powerful advice that has very real applications in how we communicate. I'm trying to think of what other, anything by Nancy Duarte. Slideology is a brilliant book if you're wanting to get better at PowerPoint as a visual medium. My podcast is literally 30 plus episodes of coaching advice. So I think those are resources that I really, really recommend. But there is no substitute for doing the inner work, which maybe we could talk about in a little bit, which is the work that we have to do on the inside to make sure that we can shine on the outside.
Absolutely. Well, and let's come back to that in part 2 of this podcast. Bronwyn, thank you so much for joining us. And if people want more information, to your point about Bronwyn and what good looks like in communication, 20 Minutes with Bronwyn on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts is a good option, and BronwynCommunications.com. Thank you so much, Bronwyn.
Good stuff, Pat.
You've been listening to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio with your host, Patrick Morrissey from Altify, right here on the Funnel Radio Network for at-work listeners like you.